about visual tools. It's a bit of an advanced webinar where we'll try to get an overview of what visual tools exist, what different types of visual tools exist, and what you can use them for. MAXQDA has, depending on how you count them, about 20 visual tools. That would leave us with 3 minutes per tool, so I will not show you all of them, but I will give you an overview and also tell you a little bit about what's important and how they are different from each other. So what we will do today is we will first talk a little bit about the objectives. Why do you use visual tools? What goals do you have with them? And then I split the visual tools in roughly 4 groups: single case, multi-case, and code relationship visualizations, and then additional other visualizations that don't really neatly fit into my classification. And then in the end, I will talk a bit about prerequisites and limitations. What shouldn't you do with visual tools? Or what do you need to do to use them well? So why do we use visual tools, and what are the requirements to using them? First of all, one thing you should be aware of when using visual tools in MAXQDA is that you mostly visualize coded data, almost exclusively. So that means you visualize coded data, coded segments to some degree. And that means that the way you code and the quality of your coding will impact your visual tools, of course. If you code in a certain way, some visual tools become more useful, less useful, or become more clear in their message or their results, or become more obscure. That's one thing you should be aware of. Your coding impacts your visuals, not only the other way around. Why do you want to use visual tools? I distinguish roughly 3 different types of usage of visual tools. The first one is that you use it for data exploration and also the verification of applied code. So you use it to explore your data, get a first insight what your data is about, or you use it to check the quality of your coding. It's both more of an explorative use. The goal here is then often to find new insights, to find new results, or to find oddities in your coded data that you then can fix because it might have been a coding error. So you use a visual tool to find something new. You can also use a visual tool to navigate your data or retrieve data, query data, which is a very different way of than compared to finding new insights. So you just want to get certain coded segments, maybe. Often a visual tool is the quickest way to get that. And the last one, that's probably the one that first comes to mind to most people, is that you want to present your results in a convincing way. You use it as a tool of communicating maybe even what you already know. For example, a chart that shows code frequencies. You already know what's common or rare, but you want to make it better understandable for the people who read your thesis or watch your poster or presentation. And that's all of them interlocked to some degree, but you can use a tool just saying like, I use it and I will see whatever it gives me. Interesting new insight. That's not the same as I have a certain result and I want to show it. And some tools are better in one things or other things, and we will come back to that in a moment. We start out with single case visualizations in MAXQDA, and these are visual tools that I grouped in this way that are used to usually visualize a single document. Here, for me, I count 4 tools among them: the document portrait, the code line, the word trends, and the code category trends. All of these visual tools help you to display one very interesting case, one very interesting document, and to show it in great detail for a very detailed analysis. So if you want to, for example, compare 2 very unique cases or portray a very unique case, then these tools are fantastic for you. I will go into detail and show you live the code line, and because the code line then will give you the basic key logic to also understand the other tools. They all somehow show you how certain codes occur within one document. And the code line, in my perspective, is the most detailed of these. And that's why I like to use it the most. I will show you two examples on how to use the code line. Here for my example, I'm using the work-life balance example project. If you have a MAXQDA license, you can just go to Open Project Examples, Work-Life Balance, and you have the same example project that I do, so you can follow along or try try this yourself with a project that already has some coded data. I'll just start with an interview here. This is here, for example, an interview. Let me see, which one do I like the most? Let's go maybe with Chris for today. And I will create the code line for Chris. So you see Chris here is one document that has been coded quite a bit, quite extensively. And now I will take a look at the code line. The code line is always visualizing the currently opened document, in this case, Chris, just one document at a time. We can here choose different options, but for now we leave it, just take it by default. And what you see here is in what order the codes occur within one document. So you see here paragraph 1 and 2, paragraph 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the document progresses from left to right. And then these colored cells here tell you what code appears where in a document. For example, we see here in paragraph 1 to 2, there is no code used, none. Why? Because this is just interview Chris and the beginning question. It makes no sense. It makes no sense to actually code this, right? Why would you code interview Chris? But then we see, okay, paragraph 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This is about the typical workday. This is this long segment over here, typical workday, that stretches from 3 to 11. But we can go even deeper and say, okay, what else was coded in this section? The typical workday, it starts here with a description of the work situation. Then they talk about free time, friends and family. Then they come back to the work situation again. And then they end by talking about education. So we see here what happens simultaneously. So what codes occur at the same time in different stages of the document. Then there's a bit of a quiet, and then it continues here with work situation, satisfaction, and so on. So I can use this as an overview of what topics come up where and what topics co-occur together. In an interview, you will often see quite a bit the interview guideline coming through, because often people move through topics based on the interview guideline, but still it gives you an idea of what topics comes first, what topics takes up a lot of room, what topic just happens to pop up here and there. For example, we see here that the topic education here with Chris is not one continuous topic, but it keeps popping up 4 times throughout the interview. It's not like one long topic like the typical workday here. This is already quite interesting with an interview, or also with, if you have a speech, for example. A speech is very interesting to see what topics are at the beginning of the speech, middle stages, late, and how are they using certain rhetoric devices. Or if you do document analysis, you can analyze how a document is structured. One very specific use case is if you use it for analyzing focus groups. Focus groups are basically group discussions. So discussions with several people, a document where several people talk. And if you integrate a focus group as a focus group document in MAXQDA, you can do this during the import stage here as a focus group transcript. The code line really has some very nice options. I can call it up here. I only show the focus groups codes here now. Let me grab them real quick. That's what I wanted. Those documents here, only for the activated codes. And I hit OK here. And then I see here how the group discussion is progressing. The moderator starts in paragraph 3, then everyone takes a turn, then the moderator is back. Here a bit discussion happens between Fatima and Olga. Here the moderator is back. And here is the section in the group discussion where there is some actual discussion going on. just that you see how this connects to our document. You see here code section number 3 is the moderator. Then we have here Olga, Olga, Fatima, Fatima, Andy, Andy. And then we see, oh, where is the discussion taking off? It's taking off here with this question. Because then people are going back and forth without being interrupted by the moderator. And these patterns can be very interesting to analyze with a code line. Or also if you're analyzing a video document and you want to see what happens in the intro, outro, how things are progressing, if you want to describe your document very closely, the code line is really a fantastic tool for that. You can collapse and expand your codes here, so you can decide on what level of detail you want to analyze them. And you always see what happens simultaneously. Code line, in my opinion, the most sophisticated, most elaborate single case visualization. Document portrait is a bit similar, has a similar structure, but it does not catch so well what's happening simultaneously. It also gives you an idea what happens at the beginning or end, but it gives you a nicer overview compared to the code line. And here with the trends analysis, we can see what words are common or what codes are common in the beginning or end of a document section. But we will not go deeper into them. Follow a quite similar logic to the code line. It gets more interesting as soon as we have more than one case. And this is the case for multi-case visualizations. Multi-case visualizations means that we usually compare several documents to each other. We see, okay, we have 5 different documents and we want to visualize all of them at once. Among these multi-case visualizations, I count the code matrix browser, which we will explore in more detail in just a second, the document comparison chart, which we'll also explore in a bit more detail, and then here the document map, the profile comparison chart, and then multi-case word and code trends. All of them are made to compare several documents to each other. I will focus now most of my attention to the code matrix browser because it has a wide range of use cases in a wide range of studies, and it's, in my opinion, one of my absolutely favorite visualization tools in MAXQDA. It can be used for so many purposes, so it's really helpful to understand it in a bit more detail. Let's have a look at the code matrix browser. What the code matrix browser is used for, we find it here under visual tools, is we use it to compare how certain codes are distributed across documents. I will make an example here, just focusing the code matrix browser on those 5 interviews here, Berlin, and those 8 codes here under work-life balance. Note I activated the document group here and the codes to limit the code matrix browser to a certain amount of data, because then it's much easier to read. I just show you real quick what happens if I don't do that. If I just call up the code matrix browser without any settings at all, it looks something like this, and it's huge and it's totally a mess because it's very hard to understand what's happening here. And it's not the fault of the code matrix browser, it's my fault here because I did not set it up with a meaningful question in mind. My question now is, I want to know how these 8 documents under work-life balance, 8 codes under work-life balance, distribute across those 5 codes in the Berlin interviews. That's quite neat. That's a very clear question. You already see here from the code frequencies, education is very common, domestic work is quite rare, but I want to see how are they split up by document. I call up the code matrix browser here, and I hit OK. It's now limited to only activated documents, only activated codes. I want to compare documents here. You can also use it to compare groups or sets or even focus group speakers with each other. Now this is a neat visual, right? This is something that we can handle. So what do we see here? What we have here is, first, as the rows of our table, it's basically a crosstab. We see the codes, education, friends, family, and so on. And we see the columns that are the documents. I have here the interview with Matteo, the interview with Selim, the interview with Riley, with Tan, and with Chris. And we see here, if we change this to the numbers, we basically have here the information, how are these 8 segments of education split up across the data. 2, 1, 0, 1, 4. The 21 here are split up by 3, 7, 2, 7, 2. But we don't want cold numbers because that's not so easy to read and can also be a bit misleading. Instead, we by default visualize it with these nodes or these squares here. You have some options on how to set this up. We cannot go into too much detail, but in most cases, it's quite a good idea to take this option here, calculate the symbol size based on percentages by column, because this will even out a bit the effect that some documents are longer or shorter than others. We use this right now and just try to understand what this tool shows us. So we see here, and we can read this really line by line. We can go to education and we see, we have here some documents with Matteo, some codes with Matteo, some with Selim, none with Riley, Tan, Chris. So if we take a look at the numbers, we see 2, 1, 0, 1, 4. And this is a fantastic use case of the Code Matrix browser because it immediately makes me wonder, did Riley not say anything about education? Didn't I have a question in my questionnaire, in my guideline about education? Here, you could maybe spot a coding error that someone forgot to code education with Riley. So the Code Matrix browser is fantastic in spotting coding errors. If you have a fixed code system where you know, I would expect that Riley says something about education. If we go deeper into the document, we can find the reason why this is uncoded and take a look at it. Apart from this, just making sure that your coding is complete, I always use this if someone sends me a project file and says, hey, Andreas, can you take a look? Did I do my coding well? First thing I call up is the Code Matrix browser to make sure that the codes are distributed in a meaningful way across the data. Then we see here friends and family. That code comes up everywhere. Work-life separation. Domestic work, we see that only comes up with Matteo and Selim, and childcare only with Selim and Tan. So we see immediately that the codes domestic work and childcare are more niche topics here, and the other codes are quite widespread. We also can tell here that Chris has quite a focus on education, and that Selim and Tan talk quite a lot about friends and family. If we take a look at the segments here, we see Chris has 4 segments about education, much more than the others do. Selim and Tan have 7 segments each about friends and family, which is also quite a lot. And then 3 and 4 about childcare. So I would guess that Selim and Tan are family people and Chris is more education focused. So Code Matrix browser is a fantastic tool for that. You can switch here between different options of displaying squares, circles, numbers. I really like this heat map option here. You can even take a look at percentages or percentages with a heat map here. I usually switch between this option and that option, but you have many options how to take a look at that. And what's also fantastic is if you just want to see, hey, wait a second, what is the statement from Selim about domestic work? This one here. If you double click on this one, MAXQDA will give you exactly that one statement. We divide that up a bit. My wife works in administration, and so on and so on. Or if I want to see the 4 statements from Chris about education, I can double click on this 4, and then I can read the 4 statements down here. So this is what I mean by you can use a tool for navigating your data, which is also very useful in addition to finding new insights. So if I would say here, I could use for quality checking. Maybe this is a coding error. I have some insights here. Selim and Tan are family people. Chris is education focused, and I can use it to retrieve data by double clicking it. So you see all the use cases combined here in the Code Matrix browser. If you have a multi-layered code system, be aware that you can also, so if you have several layers of codes and subcodes, you can also use them. I make this a bit bigger here now with 10 interviews and a few more codes. You can still collapse and expand the codes to your liking. So you can really change the nuance of your analysis quite well. You just need to have the option display codes hierarchies up here on, else it can be a bit confusing, but then you can work with this very nicely. But usually it's better to focus on a small groups of codes and not so much on everything at once, because that makes it very difficult to read. If you use a visual tool, best use it with a purpose in mind. All right, this is the code matrix browser, a fantastic tool for analyzing the distribution of documents, of codes across documents. You can also use it if you have a lot of document groups. You can also use it for document groups. Another tool, or the second tool that I want to highlight as part of the multi-case visualizations, is here the document comparison chart. It will be quite easy for you to understand because it's very similar to the code line that I showed you earlier. Remember the code line? It was this one here. And the document comparison chart is basically a code line for multiple documents at once. It's a little bit less detailed, but it gives you a better overview. Let's have a look at the code line. We earlier looked at the document Chris. Now let's look at the document Chris in context. Let's maybe take the work-life balance codes here, work situation codes, wishes for the future, and just to highlight one code, I take the education code here and make it red, just that we track one specific color. Then you can better understand what's happening here. I could call up the document comparison chart here for 5 documents, and it then looks something like this. So we have our document comparison chart here. You see it is the same logic as before, but it does not break down to this detailed level of single codes. Instead, we have here the document Matteo, Selim, Riley, Tan, Chris, and the colors here relate to the colors down here in the code system. So here it's important to have colors set up in a meaningful way. So you can always change your colors, of course, if you want to show something specific. But here we see, okay, there is this blue topic in the beginning, then there is this orange topic coming in a little bit. And you remember I made education red. So we see here 1, 2, 3, 4 education statements by Chris. Tan talked about education here. Matteo here. Riley not. Selim here. So we get an idea of what is the structure. And we see again here often like the typical structure of the document or the interview guideline coming through, but it can help us to see if someone lingers on a topic, like takes a lot of time for a certain topic, or if a topic is rather kept short, or if a topic is like here, like education, popping up over and over again, or if it is a long block. We also see here a bit coding differences, like Chris was here used and coded in a quite different way than the other documents above. And what you can also do here is, again, use it for navigation. If you say, okay, here I have a gap, there's none of my codes here, I can double click here, and the document, the MAXQDA immediately gets me to this position here, and I can check if it's all right that I don't have a code here. No, thank God, no, that would really be a lot. Okay, that's not a very interesting statement. Do you have any obligations besides your doctorate? Take care of a child. And he says like, no, I don't have any other obligations. And it's not a statement that's very interesting to code. So I would say that gap here is quite all right. And this is also fantastic. Or if I want to take a look here, oh, what does Selim here say about education? I can double click and then I come here to the education statement. Also, this can help me to see in what context people talk about education. Here, this is education with childcare, maybe. This is education here with as part of the free time. This is education here as part of wishes for the future. So I can see in what contexts, if I choose the colors in a smart way, certain topics come up. basically a code line for multiple documents. Very, very interesting for structural analysis of multiple documents at once. And I use it a lot to check if I really thoroughly coded my data. So if you see here a large gap, like half the document is uncoded, then this tells you that maybe you should take a look at this document again. I use this, like I have an assistant right now who's doing some intercoder work for me. And whenever she sends me her data, I open up the document comparison chart to get a quick look if she didn't like forget about one document or a certain section of a document. With this, I can very quickly tell if the document was thoroughly coded or not. Again, a tool not just for analysis, but for quality assurance. Yeah, that are my two favorite multi-case visualizations. You have more tools in that direction. For example, the document map is sort of a cluster analysis, and it clusters documents on how similar they are. So if you want to build a typology, the document map is really interesting. And then we have profile comparison chart and multi-case word and code trends. I'm not the biggest fan of those, but they still give you like multi-case and word code trends here. You can use it to show change over time. If a topic came up in a certain time or in certain documents and then disappeared again, like here we see at a freedom was used in the speech by Bush in 2001, and the prominence of this topic declined afterwards. In 2021, Biden did not mention freedom at all, and that the nation was maybe mentioned throughout the different presidential speeches in this case. So also quite an interesting tool. But you could also achieve something quite similar with the code matrix browser, but here this gives you more like the idea of a trend line. Third type of visualizations, and here I only count two visualizations that are really fundamental for this, and that are code relationship visualizations. While in case one, we visualize a single case, and here multiple cases, this analysis is not case-based at all. Instead, it helps us to take a look at what relationship or coexistence or co-occurrence within codes exists. So what codes do I use together frequently? I will give you a detailed example of the code relations browser. Again, one of the, in my opinion, most helpful tools in this area. But it is a tool, and both of those tools are, they have quite a lot of requirements in your coding. So if you now know you want to use those tools, they will probably impact your coding quite a bit. I'll show you an example. And this example here comes up with the work-life balance and these satisfaction codes. I will show you first how the data here was coded. Satisfaction, work-life balance. Let me check to get a quick example here. Nope. Yeah, here we have an example. The coding that's done here is coding with multiple codes at once. For example, here this person says work-life separation. That's going well for me. It's a positive evaluation. So here the code work-life separation is assigned, and the code positive is assigned as well. Or down here, maybe that's not too helpful, but here in the example, friends and family, this is about friends and family, and it's a positive statement. Here the statement is about friends and family, and it's a negative statement. So you see, in many cases, it was not consistently done here, but in many cases, one thematic code was assigned. What is it about? Education, friends and family, childcare, and so on. Or how was the evaluation of it? Is it good or is it bad? Just because someone talks a lot about friends and family does not mean that they talk in a positive way about it, right? And what we can do with these code relations visualizations is we can systematically analyze what codes come up together, what codes are used together. And I will use this to basically built a code co-occurrence table that tells us which of the codes here under work-life balance are used with these satisfaction codes. And content-wise, this will tell us, are people satisfied or unsatisfied about these topics? This is what we're trying to answer. I'll set this up here. I set this up real simple, so to make it quite transparent. I just hit here. So I here need to select the rows and columns of my code co-occurrence table. For the rows, my personal advice is, for the rows, I always take more codes, and for the columns, I try to take fewer codes. So row first, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 codes. I want to see how these 7 codes, as the rows, 7 columns, I just take 2, positive and negative. So you see here I've selected 7 codes for the rows, 2 codes for the columns. That's my recommendation. Don't do it the other way around. It just makes it much easier. I hit OK here. Intersection is the type of analysis I want here. And we get this neat little table. I move it around a little bit. What does this tell us? This looks at first glance quite similar to the code matrix browser, but it gives us a total different information. This here tells us how often the code education came up or was used together with the code positive and the code negative. Used together here means it comes up like here. Let me see. Like here, friends and family, and negative. This is accounted for here in this cell. Friends and family negative comes up at least once. I can take a look here at the numbers to better understand that. And then I see that there are 8 statements where education and the code positive were used together. And also 8 statements where education and the code negative were used together. So I can double click also on this 8 here, and then I get these statements down here that I can take a look at. Let's see, where is this? It's coming up here, education and negative, here. I would like to get more education, but it's hard because of my children. How can we use this? Well, in this specific case, it's quite useful because it gives us a good idea on what topics are evaluated positively or negatively. I would here go for this option for row percentages. So we see education, that's 50-50 positive and negative, right? 8-8. Friends and family, there are 19 negative statements and 11 positive statements. So people seem to be quite dissatisfied with the time that they have for friends and family. Work-life separation here, on the other hand, that is 7 versus 5. So 7 instances of where people say, oh, my work-life separation is going quite well. 5 times where they say it's not going very well. Childcare, we don't have too much info on that. Free time and self-care is also quite negatively evaluated. And with this, we can bring basically 2 code dimensions, you could call them, together and see how they overlap, how they co-occur. But that requires, of course, a coding like this, where you double and triple code your data. Because if you don't allow for double coding or using multiple codes on the same segment, the code relations browser will not show you anything. And even here, it is even more important to set this up properly. Because if I do this everything with everything, it will be a huge mess and you will not see anything. So if I here say code relations browser all and all, this will be a huge mess. It looks like this, and this is just looking for the needle in the haystack. This is not analysis. So if you use these tools, use them with a question, with a purpose. If you understand the tool, then you can ask meaningful questions with it. For example, I show you another question with the code relations browser. I say here work-life balance, and I analyze work-life balance with itself. And you might now say, yeah, why is that useful? Because I can answer a specific question with it. I see here now the work-life balance codes matched with each other. And I just take a look here at the column typical workday. typical workday. What codes come up as part of the typical workday? People talk about meeting friends and family, people talk about childcare, people talk about education a little bit, and about free time. So the typical workday in this case seems to be made up of spending time with friends and family, taking care of children, having some free time, and only a few people talk about education or domestic work, because education doesn't seem to be a key element of the typical workday. Maybe that's something outside of it. So you can use it in many smart ways, but you need to ensure that you do some meaningful double, triple, multi-coding, because else you will not see anything here. If you have a strict rule of only one segment, one code, you cannot use the code relations browser at all. And the other visual tool here in this section, the code map, it's quite similar here to the document map. It gives us a cluster analysis that tells us what codes are basically very similar to each other. So the codes free time and self-care and typical workday, they have been used a lot together, and thus they are very close here in this cluster analysis. But it's a very advanced analysis tool that you can use to do some sort of meta-analysis on your codes, if your code system is consistent or not. But the code relations browser is definitely the one with very, very practical applications here. Then there is more than fits my categories. And 3 of the tools that did not neatly fit in anywhere here, because they can be used for all and nothing, are MAXMaps, code frequencies in the form of charts, and clouds, word cloud or code cloud. Quick overview, the word cloud is the only tool in these visual tools that does not require any coding at all. So you can just get a cloud of the most frequent words. You don't need to do any coding with it. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it is an interesting start, and it's very decorative on a poster, for example. Code frequencies, of course, we can visualize them in bar chart, pie charts, many different ways, but that's not the key goal of visualization, at least not here. This is much more a tool for, well, quantizing data, portraying it in a meaningful way. You have many options on how to display code frequencies in a nice chart. Probably you're quite familiar with it if you've used like Excel or anything before. The tool that really stands out here is MAXMaps, and that's the last tool I will show you in detail today. And I personally am a huge fan of MAXMaps because it is a tool that is, even if you're not interested in frequencies or quantities of codes at all, MAXMaps is a fantastic tool for visualizing concepts, interrelatedness. If you want to build a model or theory, if you are doing grounded theory right now, you need to use MAXMaps, my personal opinion. I will show you MAXMaps in just a second. MAXMaps is a tool that helps us by allowing us to create basically a concept map or flowchart or whiteboard built out of MAXQDA elements. There are 2 basic ways of using it. I will start here with a new map with the fundamental way here. I just opened MAXMaps here and hit new map. This gives me this white blank page. What I can do here is I can drag and drop any elements from MAXQDA onto this whiteboard. So I can, for example, say Selim, I want to drop this document here. And Riley, I drop this document here. And maybe I want to connect them with a link. And I say something like, I create these arrows here and add a label and say they are siblings maybe. And maybe, I don't know, Tan is the parent. So I can, for example, use this to show relationships between people, just as an example. Or if you want to build a network, a social network of people or documents, this is a fantastic tool for visualizing your data as sort of a network. But I cannot only drop documents here, I can also say all of them talk about childcare, for example. I put the childcare segment here, a childcare code here. I could say all of them live in Berlin. I can drop the document group here. I can even put a memo over here. I can say, I have interviewed all of them. I want to put the interview memo here. I can also put individual coded segments here. I can put a quotation here. And then say, oh, this is a quote maybe by Riley. It's been too fast for you, I'm sure, where exactly I clicked, but I want to show you the utility, the use case of this tool, not so much the how it is done. So you can build your own maps here. I did many different things with this tool already. I built relationships between people. I visualized concepts. I built my grounded theory with this. There are a lot of things you can do, and your creativity is your limit. You see here that you don't need to care about visuals at all, quantities at all. And unless a normal flowchart mind mapping tool, these elements stay connected to MAXQDA. So if I say here childcare, I want to see these statements, I can double click and MAXQDA will give me the coded segments that are behind it. I can double click on this memo here to call up the memo. I can click on this segment to see where this segment came from. I can double click on Selim to open the document Selim or Tan or Riley. So this is really a map of your project, and you can build really amazing, beautiful maps with that. If you are not a person who likes to play around with this, or not, at least not like starting from zero, you say, hey, I want to press a button and see some results. I'm not here to build things manually. Then you can use the so-called document and code models. These are models that give you a head start. For example, you can say, I want to use the single case model here, and I would like to see what Selim is talking about. You can put Selim here, and then you see, okay, what are the most frequent topics that Selim addresses. You have some settings here. You can say, I want to have the 10 most frequent codes or something, or maybe the 5 most frequent codes, maybe the 10 most frequent codes is nice. And then you can get an overview of what Selim talked about. It looks also quite nice, like a snowflake here. If you then say use model, you can still move things around, change things. You have a wide range of models here that can be an interesting starting point. One model that I personally like quite a lot is the two-case model. You find it here, two-case model that helps you to compare two cases. For example, Selim and let's say Chris, no, not Chris, let's take something else. Selim and Tan maybe? It's not that pretty, but it's fine. So what we see here is I selected Selim and Tan. In the middle, we have the codes that they have in common, that both of them talk about. And on the right and left, we see their unique codes. So Selim talks about domestic work and more free time. Tan talks about, well, good quotes, better use of free time. That's not too exciting, but I can go through this and then maybe delete the codes that I'm not interested in. I say, okay, those codes I don't need. So you can move things around, change things around. There are many different models you can use, and you can build really creative concept maps with that. Let me see if I can quickly give you an example. Not as quickly as I would love to, but I give you a quick example of a MAXMaps. Give me a second, and then I'll show you some advanced examples on using MAXMaps. Because with MAXMaps, that's a tool where you often need some inspiration on how to do things, because it's not so obvious as, for example, a code matrix browser, what you will do with it. Let me see, freelancing. Yeah, I take a shortcut. Here, here, here. Yeah. I'll show you some examples for MAXMaps. I don't want to back up right now, thank you. Here, this is a tiny project I did, grounded theory project. Here we, for example, built a MAXMaps like this. This was the full version where we were looking into what's the relationship of the codes, what's the logic here at place. And we then began reducing it a little bit, and in the end we had like a visual like this over here. What we did here is we said, oh, there are three main dimensions, observing, grading, and intervening in the classroom basically. And then we say observing is the basis for grading, grading or evaluating something is the basis for intervention, and the intervention is evaluated by observing things. And then we begin spreading out what is being observed, what is being graded, what interventions are being done. And this is a nice, very elaborate model on what is happening here. So, and here you see only codes. It's only about code relationships, typical grounded theory project. I'll show you one additional example just that you see what else you can do. Here I had different documents by different people, and I wanted to see how they talk about each other. And I visualized it like this. So here are 5 people. This person talks about that person with this segment. So this is almost a sort of social network analysis, how the different interviewees or persons that are part of your research talk about each other. Also a very nice way to visualize a process. Or I had a legal process here where I just tried to understand how the process is happening. It started out here with this document, and this happened, and that helped me to trace the process that I was researching. So there are a lot of things that you can do with MAXMaps. It's a fantastic tool with a wide range of use cases. And it can be for a single case, for multiple cases, for code relationships. You can basically use it for everything. But you need to have some ideas in mind what to do with it. All right, conclusions. What are the requirements and the limitations of visual tools? Visualization of data, and that you should be aware of, visualization of data often implies quantifying data, counting data, visualizing frequencies to some degree. So if you don't trust the numbers, you should also be very careful in trusting the visuals, because the visuals are built on numbers in many cases, not MAXMaps, but in most other cases. So if you don't trust your numbers, why would you trust the code matrix browser? It visualizes numbers. So be aware of that. Specific coding techniques are required for certain visual tools. Code Relations Browser, for example, you need to code with like multiple codes to use that. If you don't do it, you cannot use this tool. Also consider the data structure. In visualizations, often long documents, extensive documents will look very important and big, and short documents might easily be overlooked. Be aware of that. And use, for example, these column percentages. And the most important thing is always question your visual results. Before you jump to a conclusion based on a visual, make sure you understand this visual, you question it, you make sure you have no coding error in there, and when all other reasons are like ruled out, then you can draw content-wise conclusions from it. Be careful in quickly jumping to conclusions with visual tools, because if you do that, visual tools can even sabotage your research because you create visuals that don't stand scrutiny, where a supervisor might say, hey, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. Of course, this is the longest document. Of course, it's this way. Make sure that you understand the visuals that you're using. Also differentiate what you use the visual tools for. For example, to discover new insights versus illustrating something that you already know. With MAXMaps, the tool I showed you in the end, it's quite hard to find new insights, but you can visualize processes, dynamics, relationships in a fantastic way, but you need to be aware of them already. With other tools, like the Code Matrix Browser, you can use it more to discover new insights. Also, don't try to be the person who uses 20 different visual tools in their thesis. focus on a few meaningful visual tools that you understand deeply and use them over and over and over again. That's a more meaningful way than trying to make sense of the word cloud or the code map just because you think it would be fancy to use it. Also, plan in advance. If you now have seen some of the visual tools and you are like, I like this one, plan it and then code with this tool in mind. Then you know my visuals will have, my results will take this form in some way, and I will use this tool for this purpose. Yeah, if you want to have some help from me, I'm a researcher myself. I'm also a research consultant. I do these webinars, these trainings, these teachings as my full-time living. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can also reach out to me by email if you would like to have the slides of this webinar. I'm sharing my email again in the chat. You can send me a quick email, slides please, and I send you a PDF of the slides. That's the easiest way for me to distribute it. And if you have a quick follow-up question, you can drop it as well.